Hey folks, George here again. Today when we talk about a philosophical question, the question that we're going to engage with and try to examine and try to analyze is the question, who am I? Or who are you? Right? Who am I really? First, a few considerations to keep in mind as we examine the ideas of so many different philosophers. I think we're going to use a lot of words that are very similar that might not exactly mean the same thing. However, we'll see that you'll forgive me, I hope, that I'm going to use some of these words interchangeably at times as meaning the same thing, but maybe they don't really mean the same thing. And like I said, I just hope you'll forgive me as we carry on through this. Some of these words are going to be the soul, right? The soul. What is that thing? Well, I'm going to use it as a synonym for this I, right? The soul, consciousness, the self, mind, and identity. Now, I'm not going to define each and every one of those words right now, but we will use those words. So keep them in mind, despite the fact that I'm going to try to use them interchangeably, and I might use them interchangeably. Maybe they're not as interchangeable as all that, really. So, like I said, I hope you'll forgive me with my sloppiness here. But this really does show the value and the importance of very careful philosophical thinking. Maybe you'll test me out as we have these discussions here, right? And call me out for my sloppy philosophical thinking when I use the words soul and mind and self all interchangeably, right? But we do have to move on nonetheless, and these will be words that I use. The first set of philosophers who are going to answer this question that I'm going to explore today are Plato, Descartes, and John Locke. All three of these philosophers are going to be in this dualist camp of philosophers. That is to say that they think there are two things in the world, two kinds of things, dual things, dual substances in the world. In this discussion, the two types of things will be physical things, matter, material things, things like my books back there that are made out of matter and physical stuff. But then it's going to be contrasted with a non-physical, non-material substance in the universe, in existence, called the soul. What exactly will that mean? Well, we'll see what that means through these different philosophers and how they utilize this non-material soul and how they talk about a non-material soul. Because all three of them will say something a bit similar, although with slight tweaks as we go along the way, and slight changes, and even slight differences as we go along the way. But they are all going to agree that I am really something immaterial. I am this soul, and not necessarily this stuff right here, whatever this material stuff is. We'll talk about that today a little bit more. By the way, just as a sort of side note, there are monists on both sides of that debate too, right? There are people that say, no, there are not two kinds of things in the universe. There's only physical matter. We're going to call them monists, right? There are monists who say that there is only physical matter in the universe, in all of existence. But there are a handful of philosophers too who say, no, there's only one type of stuff in the universe, one type of stuff in existence, and it is souls, or spiritual things, non-material items. And those are the only things that exist in all of existence. We'll examine both of those different positions before this whole series is over, right? Let's examine first Plato and what Plato says about the soul and the true nature of who I am. Who am I really? Plato is a dualist philosopher. He's from ancient Greece. Plato is really nice because he really demarcates and explains what he means between these two things: soul substances, soul-like immaterial substances called, like the soul, and material substances like physical matter, like my books back there and my blazer, amongst other things. First, let's talk about soul-like matter. Soul-like matter is going to be perfect. It's perfect, right? It never changes. It's eternal. Therefore, doesn't that mean it has a greater reality, a greater existence, right? This is contrasted with physical things, which are imperfect. They are changing. They are temporary as opposed to permanent, and thus they have a lesser reality, right? Things in the physical realm of existence, these things decay and disappear and die. Whereas in this eternal realm of existence, things are immortal and last forever. Of course, the body dies, yet the soul is eternal and lives forever. That's going to be the difference here. The true George is the thing that lives forever, the soul that lives forever, not this body that's going to die and decay and disappear and turn into dust one day. That's not the true George. The true George is the eternal soul that is George. Here's an interesting twist on this notion of eternal too. Eternal doesn't just go forward into the future. It's not just that it lives forever into the future, but, and this is we will discuss later the philosophical implications for this, it also existed forever into the past. This soul is eternal in both directions. It's always existed and always will exist. This, of course, is different from the body. My body has only existed for a bit more than 40 years, right? And it will only exist for another, let's say, 40 or 50 or 60 more years. I hope longer than sooner, right? But it will disappear. This body will dissolve and die and transform into something else, and that's why it makes it lesser. That is part of the argument to suggest that the soul is a higher realm, and that immaterial realm that Plato posits is a higher reality, because after all, isn't it higher and better to be permanent and perfect? And that's why that is the higher realm. That's why the physical realm is the lesser realm. I like that John Chafee throws in a little curveball with a female philosopher from ancient Greece called Diotima. And Diotima disagrees with Plato a bit. She actually says the soul does change. The soul does change. Plato says that the soul is, being perfect, does not ever change. Yet Diotima suggests, well, doesn't the soul change? It's just like the body in that it does change. When you learn things, don't you change? For example, right? Well, we'll see a little bit later. I'll get into this in more detail in a bit later in a different video here, that Plato will say, yeah, your soul doesn't really learn anything. Rather, you remember what you already knew, right? So that's how Plato gets out of that. But that doesn't make sense to Diotima, who says when you learn things, when you improve, your soul gets better and changes. Which explanation of the soul is better? I'm not sure. Perhaps that's a topic for you to examine and think about a bit more, right? In addition to that, however, Plato does put forward a chariot analogy to really illustrate how the soul and body work together, right? Because after all, if there is this immaterial soul and this material body, how do they work together? How is it that this thing has two pieces, two substances in it? And Plato's answer to that is with this chariot analogy. And the chariot analogy is such that there's a charioteer who is driving two horses, right? And the two horses, by the way, are the body. That's how I'm making sense of it in any case. That's how I'm trying to put together his philosophy, is that the charioteer is like the soul that's driving these two horses, which are really part of the material realm. What does that mean? Well, a charioteer has reason. It has rationality, right? It's the more reasonable side of yourself. It's the soul, as far as I can tell, right? Whereas, what are the two horses? Well, he gives us two horses to describe two sort of aspects of the body, I think. And that is, the body has physical appetites, but also it has emotional appetites too. So what is the role of the soul then? It is to drive these two desires that the body has, both these emotional passions and these physical appetites like food and sex as well, right? These are physical desires. They're passionate, emotional desires. And it's the job of the soul to control these two horses using reason and thinking and spirit, yeah? After all, doesn't, according to Plato, the body sort of work against us in many ways? I know that when I want to go on a diet, for example, and I want to treat my body a little bit better, I don't like eating too much cake or chocolate. Yet, when there's cake and chocolate in front of me, the body wants all this cake and chocolate. Yet, it's my reason that says, wait a second, George, you eat too much sugar. Try to lay low on the sugar. And the soul is trying to control these physical appetites of the body, right? Amongst others. Because, after all, it is the body that corrupts and blinds and clouds the pure reason and truth that the soul has within it, right? It keeps the soul from being perfect because of these physical appetites and emotional and passionate appetites, right? And that's how there is this constant struggle. That makes a lot of sense to me because, like I said, I've got a lot of physical appetites, yet when I think about things, my reason tells me to desire one thing, but my body takes me in another direction sometimes, right? And we do have this conflict. We do have this conflict, don't we? Or at least I do. The next philosopher that we'll engage with, who tries to answer, who am I, is René Descartes. And René Descartes, a French modern philosopher, some people will say he's the first modern philosopher. There's some debates that might be had here, but colloquially, sometimes he's referred to as the first modern philosopher. And what makes Descartes modern? Well, he tries to modernize a lot of the dualist ideas that Plato put forward. How does he modernize these? Because René Descartes gives a very careful, well thought out argument regarding dualism and the fact that there is a soul versus a body, or a soul and a body, right? Whereas Plato asserted it a little bit more than gave good, strong argumentation, rational argumentation for the proof of these things. René Descartes is going to give us a better, well-reasoned argument to suppose and believe in the dualist aspects of this philosophy. How does he give this argument? Well, number one, Descartes, like Plato, is a rationalist. What does that mean as a rationalist? That he really believes that reason and thinking rationally about things is the key to true knowledge. What does reason say about the world around us? That's the truest nature of that we can discover. That's the truest nature that we can discover through reason. And that's why Descartes, like Plato, is a rationalist. Yeah, this will be contrasted next with Locke's empiricism. We'll see how that goes in a second. But first, Descartes' rationalism. How does Descartes start his rationalist philosophy? Number one, Descartes starts with something called radical doubt. He doubts everything possible. Why? Because he knows that he might be wrong, right? How many things have you believed? I know there's lots of things that I've believed that are absolutely false, that I later discover to be false. So what does Descartes suggest? Let us start by believing nothing. Doubt everything right now. How can I go from doubting everything? Is it possible to doubt everything? Start from zero and then build a foundation up to believing in at least the soul and other things about reality. Descartes says yes. Descartes believes that he is successful with that project and that rationalism is the key to giving us truth, according to Descartes. Let's explain how Descartes forms this foundation of knowledge, this rationalist foundation of knowledge then. First, his first step is, what is the one thing that I cannot doubt? What is something that I cannot doubt? What is one thing that is indubitable? Yes? His answer to that question is, I can't doubt that I'm doubting. Did you catch that? I can't doubt that I'm doubting. Because if you do doubt that you're doubting, what are you doing? You're doubting. Therefore, I am certain that I am doubting. That's one foundation. That's the first brick of this firm foundation for knowledge that Descartes gives us. I know that I'm doubting. Thus, what is doubting? Well, doubting is just thinking, right? Isn't it a specific kind of thinking? Therefore, I can't doubt that I'm thinking. What does that entail? That entails his famous Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. That is the famous Cartesian dictum here, that we finally understand what that means. It means that I am essentially a thinking thing. I am whatever else I am. He doubts everything. He doubts that I even have a body. He doubts that I have hair, that I have skin, right? But I can't doubt that I'm thinking. I am essentially a thinking thing, according to Descartes. What does it mean to be a thinking thing? A thinking thing is a thing that affirms, that refuses, that wills, that denies, that imagines, that perceives, that understands, that feels, and of course, that doubts. Yeah? What does this entail? Well, this is the first step towards dualism, isn't it? Because I know that I'm a thinking thing, similar to Plato's idea that the soul is pure reason and is essentially a thinking thing, as opposed to the body, which is a sensual thing or a sensing. So, like Plato, Descartes is going to say that there are two kinds of things in the universe, two kinds of things in existence. There is physical stuff, and there is thinking or mental stuff, which is not physical. It is not made of matter. The thinking part of me is not a material thing. How does he get to that then? Descartes is a modern philosopher, so he has to prove his point about dualism, that there is thinking stuff and there is material stuff and they're separate, right? He says, I am not essentially the body. What am I essentially? I'm a thinking thing. I am not essentially the body. The body is secondary. My body is secondary to the thinking aspect of me, right? The body is like a machine, and that's all it is. As a matter of fact, he suggests that he can imagine a body that runs and works without a soul or a thinking thing inside of it, right? And by the way, once we die, there are bodies that don't have thinking stuff as part of it. So there must be a completely different substance called thinking substance, mental substance, spiritual substance, versus material substance. What other reasons does Descartes give to suggest that and prove that I am essentially the thinking stuff, not the bodily, material stuff? He says, cut off my arm. Aren't you the same person? Your mental capacities are all the same. Cut off your arm, cut off your foot, cut off different parts of your body. And by the way, that is what happens. You'll see that I haven't had a haircut in a little while. But you cut off parts of my body, the hair, aren't I still George? I cut my fingernails frequently. My toenails too, a little bit less frequently. And I am still George. And go a little bit further, cut off my arm. I'm still George. I'm still the same thinking George, right? I have all the same thoughts, all the same affirmations, all the same denials, all the same perceptions, all the same understandings. It's possible to divide up the body by chopping it up. It's possible to divide up the body, but it's not possible to divide up the mind or the soul. I'm using those two terms interchangeably here. Forgive me. It's not possible to divide up the mind or the self because it is a unified whole. Here is a key problem with all of dualist philosophy, however, right? That goes certainly back to Plato, but is really explicated in Descartes, after Descartes' philosophy. There is the mind-body problem. The mind-body problem. What is the mind-body problem? The mind-body problem is, how does the mind, this immaterial substance, if you are a dualist, how does this immaterial substance drive this material body? Right? Now, you'll forgive me. I don't know a lot about cars. I'm just not a car guy. That part of my childhood swept past me. As I'm not a car guy, I don't know how cars work. I put in the key, I step on the pedal, and it goes. Right? However, if you explained to me how a car works, it will be physical all the way down. And you'll describe to me all sorts of physical processes all the way through. Well, you put in the car, the key in the ignition, you turn the ignition, I push the pedal on the car, and the pedal on the car is connected somehow to the engine, and the engine is somehow connected to the wheels, and the car moves forward. All physical processes. All physical processes. Explain the process by which a non-physical, immaterial mind drives a physical body. How does that work? How does that work? And you could talk about how the body works, and I've taken a neuroscience class or two. I know that there's neurons in here that fire, and they tell the body to raise my hand through these neurons. But Descartes says there's a mind or a self or a soul that makes me raise my hand. How does that happen? I could follow all the steps from the neurons in the brain, sending messages all the way down the arm and telling it raise the hand. But that very initial step that dualism entails, which is there's a mind, an immaterial mind, that puts all that into motion. How does that happen? And that's going to be a terrible problem for all of the dualists out there. How does the soul drive the mind? I love Mark Twain, who gives this problem a more visceral sort of explanation. Why is it that it's the body that drinks alcohol, yet the mind, or the self, or the soul, but the mind gets drunk? How does that happen? That is essentially the mind-body problem. Another problem that isn't mentioned by John Chafee in this textbook, that will come up later, is this question of the other minds problem. By the way, Descartes' dictum is cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I know that I've got a mind. Descartes helps us prove that I know that I have a mind. But how do I know that you have a mind? That's going to be an interesting problem that we'll engage with later. Now let's move on to John Locke. John Locke is going to be different from Descartes and Plato in that John Locke is an empiricist philosopher. And that's in distinction from rationalist philosophers like Descartes and Plato. Remember that rationalism suggested that true knowledge is best discovered through reason and rational thinking. Whereas John Locke, being an empiricist, is going to say, no, true knowledge, in fact, is discovered through the senses and through sensory experience and experience in the world around us. It's experience and our senses that give us true knowledge. And that's how John Locke is going to be different from Descartes and Plato. Yet he's still going to come up to similar conclusions, that there is a soul inside of here, right? How does he get to that? He obviously can't start with, I think, therefore I am, because that's a rationalist equation. So let's see how John Locke gets to I exist and I am a thinking thing. Well, How do we discover the true nature of ourself? John Locke is going to say, by perceiving, by seeing, by perceiving. That's what empiricism says. Perceive, and you shall find the truth. Here's his point. It's impossible to perceive without perceiving that he perceives. Here's John Locke's point. It's impossible for someone to perceive without perceiving that he perceives. So, not only do I see the camera right now filming me, but I also know that I see the camera filming me. Do we see that extra step, that higher order thinking that John Locke says we all have? And it's in virtue of that higher order thinking that we have minds. That's who I am. I'm not only conscious of the camera in front of me, I'm conscious that I'm conscious of the camera in front of me. I know that I see the camera in front of me. I'm self-conscious. That's how I perceive the self. I see the self in there. And thus, self-consciousness is what I truly am. I am truly a being that is self-conscious. And that is my personal identity. I'm the only person who's conscious of these perceptions, right? I'm the only person that sees the world the way I do. And I'm the only person who sees the world the way I do and knows that I see the world the way I do. And that is how I get, via John Locke's philosophy, personal identity. He recognizes a problem with that, though, right? What happens every night? Well, for me, I sleep every night. How does that work? I become unconscious every night. Now, okay, I might dream somewhere in the middle there, but I'm suggesting that at least for a short amount of time, I am unconscious for a short amount of time. I am unconscious. What does that mean for John Locke's philosophy? Well, John Locke is going to say, we solve that problem, he solves this problem with memory. I remember George's perceptions from yesterday. That's why I am the same George from yesterday. Now, I know that I'm the same George from this morning. Why? Because I've been with that George the whole time. But what about that George from yesterday? I haven't been with that George since yesterday. After all, I slept and I became unconscious for about 8 hours. However, I am that same George. How? Because I remember or I perceive the same memories that that George from yesterday perceived. That's why I'm the same George. Right? That proves for John Locke that I'm the same George from yesterday and from last year and from 10 years ago and from 20 and 30 years ago. I am that same George because I remember the same, I have the same perceptions as the George from all those times in the past. All of those give me a sense, and my personal identity give me a sense of unity. There is a unified personal identity here because all of those are unified in having the same perceptions. We might say, to a certain degree, that memories define who I am, according to John Locke. This is a different sort of philosophy from Descartes, whereas Descartes suggests, I think, therefore I am. Now, these are my words here, but I'm suggesting that John Locke might say something like, I perceive myself, therefore I am. That's how John Locke is going to be different from Descartes. I perceive myself, therefore I am. He doesn't exactly say that, but I'm putting those words in his mouth. That's my interpretation, right? What does this mean? Well, there are a few interesting entailments for this. And John Locke understands these entailments, right? He says that, yes, even though, because I'm unconscious every night, it might be the case that my soul is different. It's not the same exact soul as the soul from yesterday and the soul from 10 years ago. It's okay, though, for John Locke, because what does unify all that is the memories, right? By the way, a lot of interesting movies have been made about souls traveling into different bodies and different souls changing bodies, let's say. As long as you have the same memories, that is who you truly are, right? What does that say about us criminal law then? Well, in certain countries, if you do suffer from amnesia of having committed the crime, should you be punished? Or would that be a different person who committed the crime? If, for example, I suffered from some terrible head injury. I think John Locke would say, you're not that same person if you don't have those same memories. Right? That's what I like about philosophy. Sometimes we go out into these interesting thought experiments. I hope that helps us understand a little beginning about dualist philosophy and who I truly am. Yes? We'll talk next time. Bye-bye.